Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today I had the privilege of being on location at the Halter headquarters here in Auckland, New Zealand, talking with the founder and CEO of Halter, which is a virtual fencing and virtual platform. Now, if you've been following some of my Nuffield journey through the country of New Zealand on my social media pages, you'll see some of the insights that I gained on farm through a new technology in pasture-based farming, dairy farming, and beef farming called Halter. If you haven't seen those, I would definitely recommend you check those out after listening to this episode so you can see what Craig and I were talking about, the videos and the pictures. I think this is a fascinating story. Craig is a great example of a founder of an ag tech company, and they've really scaled their business from a small startup company in a small country like New Zealand to being a powerhouse in technology in the grazing-based systems around the world now in 3 different markets across New Zealand, Australia, and the US, and we'll talk more about that in the episode. So take a listen. I know you're really going to like this episode with Craig Piggott from Halter. Piggott, thank you so much for having me today at the world headquarters for Halter, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Here in Auckland, New Zealand.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to having a great conversation about some of the technology that you and your team have been developing over, the last, how many years?
Maybe 8 years, I think.
8 years.
Roughly that, at least.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So it's been a passion project of yours that started out. And why don't you give us a bit of background, your personal story of how you got to where things are at today?
Yeah, so Halter started at the end of 2016, so I think roughly 8 years. Prior to Halter, I was working at another startup called Rocket Lab. They're a New Zealand or a Kiwi-based company that is now kind of half US, half Kiwi, but they're a satellite launch company. So that was like my first exposure to startups and raising capital and chasing like a pretty crazy mission and whatnot. And then before Rocket Lab, I'm an engineer by training, which is really what took me there. And I grew up on a dairy farm, pasture-based dairy farm here in New Zealand in the Waikato, so about 2 hours south of here.
Okay.
So my parents are farmers. I loved everything about ag. I guess the combo of knowing the problems in farming and ag and being an engineer, so thinking about how you would fix that or change that or the solutions, and then being part of a startup, I think was kind of the 3 things that led to Halter being born. And yeah, it's been a pretty crazy journey since then.
So why don't you tell the audience what actually Halter is from a really high level here before we dive into the details? Yeah,
so there's probably 2 parts of the Halter system, which it's worth starting with. So there's a collar that goes on a cow, and then there's an app which a farmer uses. That collar does 2 things. The predictable, the straightforward side of that is it's monitoring the animal. So it's monitoring location, health, fertility, things like that. Think Fitbit for a cow. The more like innovative side of that is we're able to actually train the animals to respond to cues. And so we're able to fence the animals, shift them, and help manage I guess the movement and the feeding of those animals on pasture. So across dairy and beef, and this leads to, I guess, effortless rotational grazing, just less time from staff, more precision, a lot of gains in productivity. So that's at a high level. We also measure the pasture and the grass using satellites and do a whole lot of other stuff as well to help. But that's the overview, I guess.
So what did this idea look like when you first started it? Was it this that we're looking at on the wall in the SaaS model that you had in your head, or was it something a little different that actually was the initial catalyst for Halter?
The initial question, I guess, was like, on a pasture-based farm, the single most important thing is how you graze your grass. So that's like the lever which a farmer is able to control. That really makes a difference to profitability or efficiency or really any of those kind of key metrics, EBITDA per hectare, whatever. And doing that with paddocks is a relatively constraining technique. And so the thought was, if we could do that with a collar, I think that's probably the single most valuable place to play on a farm. And so we thought a collar, virtual fencing, and that was about it in the beginning. We weren't sure if it was possible. I had done things like calf club where you're like training calves and cows learn sounds on a farm. So you have a good intuition that like they should be able to learn. They've kind of proved they're smart enough in these other cases, but could software be used to do that? And so that was really the first goal. And then all the other features and all the rest of the product values kind of been added on over time. Once we knew we could train a cow and they'd listen to a collar. But that first phase maybe took a couple of years, and then it's grown since then. This was our second generation of hardware. We're now on our fourth. So this is kind of like an ancient relic. It's
good wall ornament. Right?
Yeah, literally, it's art really. But the current collars are like 5 times smaller and a lot lighter and everything. So
yeah. So Craig, going back to your entrepreneurship journey, every startup starts out with a crazy mess, chaotic, right? What was that aha moment that you had? Like, I think this is really going to work. I think this is really going to be something.
Yeah, that's I get asked that question a lot now. Especially that we recently won like a fastest growing company award, and we're in multiple markets, and so it really feels like we've made a lot of progress now, and from a external perspective, I guess. The way I always answer it is like there's never been like a month or this big light bulb moment which is like, oh, we've cracked it. It's been consistent every day. Just tweaking and improving like all parts of the product and the system, and it all just compounds over time. So it's been probably a lot more of a just grind would be maybe too much of a negative word, but just a consistent focus on all the little details over and over and over again that's compounded. So that would be probably the broad answer. There may be exceptions to that would be things like the first farm. Like we had our own research farm running, but when we first had a customer like using the product and as part of their workflow every day, they eventually ended up moving to France. And like, that's obviously like a notable, it was also very scary, but like that was probably like this is on a real farm that isn't my parents. And like it's working. And so when we could first train a cow, obviously these moments, but broadly speaking, the first 4 or 5 years of Halter, you're always looking for there's always the next challenge to solve. We couldn't train a cow to listen to the collars, and then when we could, it took like 3 months to do one cow, so that's not commercially feasible. And then we couldn't train a herd, so we have to work out how to do that. And then you can train a herd or a farm, but you're losing like 10 times more money on that farm than they're ever paying you. So then you got to work out the commercials, and it kind of goes on. And I think in reflection, that never goes away. Like as long as you're ambitious, as long as you're willing to push the boundaries, you're always going to be butting up against the next challenge. Like we're currently expanding into the US, and if the US was like easy and everything was going well and there was no worries, well then we'd open up a new market. Like,
right.
And so I always come back to this Greg LeMond quote, but it's like it never gets easier, you just get faster. It's just this mindset of like ambition and continually trying to improve.
Yeah, and you mentioned you're in the U.S. market now. You're also in Australia, New Zealand. So you're in 3 different countries on roughly, 250,000 cows?
Yes, we passed that milestone maybe a few months ago, 6 months ago. So.
Okay, yeah. What are the big learnings that you've had even looking at launching into a large market like the U.S.?
Every month, I think you have to be... you've got to be very respectful of like a new market. And what I mean by that is you have to remind yourself that you know nothing about that market, that you hope the product works very well like it does in your existing markets, but there'll be a lot of things you'll learn. That could be like from a system perspective, that could be culturally, that could be anything to how you service the customers. So I think you just go in eyes open, you just be a sponge. You try and learn as much as you can, and you just move fast. You learn and you iterate and improve as fast as you can. And that's been kind of core to Halter the whole way through. Every time we go into a new market, that's what we do. And then you see it just compounds and builds. You launch your first customers, they have a great experience, they love the product, they obviously tell their neighbors, etc. They become reference customers, and it kind of grows from that. So, but I think it all comes back to just listening, being a sponge, making sure you adapt the product for that market before you then pile in the scale and the teams and the people and to really like accelerate growth.
And with the U.S., you're not only going after a new geographic market, but really your focus in New Zealand's always been on the dairy.
Yep.
Whereas the U.S. Dairy market is a very different system of farming that is not grass-based like New Zealand.
Yep.
So you're focusing, my understanding, more on the beef market in the U.S. So you're really looking at a different sector and a different geography. Is that right?
Yes, it is kind of there's kind of two elements, both those elements at play. I'll probably answer this in a few ways. So the first one is, we're not specifically targeting dairy in the US. We have a few kind of dairy customers, etc. If it's an organic setup or they spend a lot of days of the year on pasture, that's fine. But first and foremost, we are a product for pasture-based systems. So that's the fundamental value proposition of Halter. If they're on grass, then you have to obviously manage the grazing, virtual fencing and shifting, and all the data we have is a way to really improve that. So we're not looking to go after cows in feedlots or cows in parlours. And so we're kind of, our mission is really the pasture-based side of it. To de-risk the new country and new product, we've been doing beef in New Zealand for a while now. We've been doing beef in Australia. Fundamentally, it's a slightly simpler product than dairy. And it's kind of more it's a bigger market globally. So a good analogy here is like the Tesla strategy where you launch the Model S or the Roadster, and as you get scale and you can bring costs down, you do the Model 3, the kind of mass market, it's the cheaper car. And that's the same thing for us. As we've managed to bring down our costs, we could do beef at a cheaper price point and lower margin or tighter margins typically in beef. So that's been the strategy as well. So, but so far, all signs are pretty good.
What are some of the biggest learnings that you've had in the differences in the geographies that you've operated in, from New Zealand to Australia to the US?
If we say focusing on the US, I think the biggest differences are probably the vastness of the properties in the setup. There's also a lot of diversity in customer base, obviously depending on state and weather and climate, etc. But these things weren't really, I wouldn't maybe call them a surprise. We had a pretty good idea of this beforehand, and we'd been working on it probably prior to launching. But that's been the main focus for us. So it's just continuing to push the range between the tower and the collars, the flexibility of that setup, how you can move them around, just trying to ensure that the product works just as well in the US as it does here. So outside of that, it's been a lot of little software-based changes or simple things, often like language and words.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, actually, okay, no one called, it's ranching over there and it's farming here, right?
Yep.
That's just a really simple way to start. So, but yeah, probably the vastness of the properties has been the biggest difference between the US and New Zealand. I think fundamentally the goals are the same. You're trying to utilize as much grass as possible. A few other things in the US are valuable, but that's I think the core.
Okay. Early on, as you were getting started on the cow side of things, what were the big insights that you had or things that surprised you about the cattle and how they responded to the technology?
I think we're always amazed at how smart cows are. And that's coming from someone who spent a lot of time with cows and calves in my childhood. So, but I think when you're using software to train an animal and it's 100% reliable and consistent and predictable, it's impressive how well they get to learn the system and how well they interact with the system and how calm they are. I think an interesting or kind of a fun learning was I didn't realize how much the relationship between a human and a cow is influenced by the fact that you have to manage them. So if you're there every day, or every second or third day, shifting the stock, putting up fences, like you are really associated with that process. And so when you strip that away and a collar is doing that, your relationship with the cow changes a lot. And that was really surprising. Like, I think we didn't predict that. And if you ask any of our farmers, they'll say like their cows come down a lot, that you can walk into a paddock like before milking time or before you're about to shift them, and they often just don't take any notice of you. You're like a tree. Yep. They're just like, you can walk closer to them. It's a funny change, and I don't think there's really any massive like productivity benefits to that. It was just like an interesting and quite a cool experience, I guess.
Yeah. No, I definitely noticed that. I was on a farm a couple of weeks ago, walking through a paddock. It was about an hour before they were going to get shifted, and they all came up to the gateway, ready to go through the gate because they knew it was about time to get shifted. Yeah. Whereas when I was at a Halter farm that I visited in Southland, that I'm going to put on our social media feeds, I'll throw some videos on that. But I was there literally a minute before they were going to get shifted. And so we could watch them, how they responded to that fence, the virtual fence being put down. Yep. And like you said, they were just sitting there, kind of didn't even really take notice of us. A few of them sniffed us, but they didn't all move as a group, getting ready to get shifted. So that was quite an interesting response.
It's a thing which almost every farmer comments on. And in the beginning, that wasn't part of the thesis at all. And I think it's cool. I think it's really neat as a farmer. I think a lot of farmers care a lot about their animals. And to have that change is like quite a cool observation, or quite a cool experience.
Yeah. And going down that animal welfare track, I know virtual fencing had a little time where it was being questioned from an animal welfare standpoint, and some things were being said about that probably weren't true about how it moves cows. What was your response to that, and how would you answer somebody that says that has a concern about animal welfare with virtual fencing technology like yours?
Yeah, I think the starting point here is like it's a new technology. I think right in the beginning of Halter's time, we didn't really spend any time talking externally about how the product works because we were trying to get it to work. So
it might change next week. Right?
And so we were focused on like, well, there's no point doing marketing or PR if the product doesn't work, right? We're going to work on. So right in the early years of Halter, we were kind of just kept to ourselves, and the flow on from that probably was when it started to work and we really started to scale. Everyone was like, who is this company and what do they do and how does it work? And they're really secretive. And so we were like, okay, we should start actually explaining how and, being more open. And we've since done a lot of great work on this. So I think in the beginning, it's a new technology. It seems like magic. I think all the best technology does feel like magic. Like that's just how it is. And so then some people find that really intimidating. And so I think I'm like, fair enough. That's a perfectly rational response. Especially when we use like a very low energy electrical pulse to train these animals as a secondary cue. It's not the primary cue. It's not how we guide them. And so the moment that's added in, it's obviously like a bit unnerving and people find it scary. So now I think the thing we always come back to is like the science is pretty clear. And we've done like the most comprehensive independent study on this where we've taken managed a herd of dairy cows at the Tasmanian Institute of Ag, and we've measured cortisol and body weight and like every metric you could think of, and shown that there's no difference in stress or for these animals between typical fencing or virtual fencing. And we kind of know that, and all our customers know that because they interact with their cows every day. So I think the science is very clear. I also think there's just nothing like if cows were stressed, they are less productive. Yeah. Like that's a fact, and every farmer knows that. And so there's just nothing it just wouldn't work, right? Like, and the system's very, like predictable and controllable, et cetera. So that's how, it's very similar to the system that's there today. The primary cue for physical fence is vision, and for us it's sound. So, that's I guess the overview. And I think since we've been more open, we've shared a lot of our data, our animal welfare charter, we've done these studies. people have started to realize like, okay, this makes more sense.
Yeah. So if anyone goes out to a farm and sees how cows react to it, they get it pretty quick if they understand cows at all.
Yeah, anyone that was like very vocal would often just say, hey, come see it, come check it out. Like, and I were often blown away by like how calm and everything the cows are. And the benefits are obviously on the benefit side are massive in terms of like social hierarchy and lameness. And you're not having to have a worker behind a mob of cows shifting them. A lot of the doesn't matter how long it takes them to walk.
Right. Well, that's a great lead into the next question I had for you. When you originally started Halter, were you looking for it to be like a completely disruptive technology, or were you looking at it to be more of an evolutionary technology that moved pasture-based dairying to the next forefront?
I think in the first, right, we've always tried to be relatively disruptive. I think a lot of technology or a lot of innovation in ag has been playing around the edges.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been innovation on equipment or on milking plant stuff, and it hasn't been like at the heart of the farm. It hasn't really been on the thing that matters. And that's why we really focused in on like, okay, we want to build a collar. We want to focus in on how you manage your pasture and grazing. And if you get that, like if you can utilize 1% more grass, you just are 1% more productive. Like that is, and so like it's the right place to be kind of playing with the levers. And so that was why we, I guess, started there. And we've always tried to we didn't want it to be another like little incremental change. Mm-hmm. That's what keeps pushing us today. Half the company's product and engineering. We release new products pretty much most weeks. The level of ambition hasn't changed; it's only gone up. So, we want to have a massive impact on the industry in a really positive way.
What does that look like 5 to 10 years from now if you had everything that you could possibly want with Halter?
Mm-hmm. Our vision is to build this operating system for agriculture. I think that hasn't been possible in the past because there just hasn't been access to the data and insights you've needed to actually make better decisions or kind of run a system digitally. And the only way to access that information is to be vertically integrated, build the hardware, build the connectivity, build the power systems to actually measure the things that matter. And on a pasture-based system, that's everything around grass, everything around the animal. That's exactly what we've kind of done, and we've built that platform. So now it's about how do we build on top of the platform. We have the collars, we have the towers, we have the ability to really ingest all the data, and we have no shortage of like product requests. Like every day, you could add hundreds of things to the list to build from our customers. And so we want to push it towards much like an operating system on a computer. That's how you think about your farm. You're making high quality decisions every day. You're mapping what they look like over a season. You're able to run scenarios and simulate what happens if I do X, Y, and Z. If it's a bit colder than I thought and growth slows and I add some supplement in, and how does it respond over the season? So I think we'll just keep building towards that across agriculture.
How does your team look at return on investment for a farmer? Is it just, these are the blanket things that we're looking at, or is it really looking at the individual farm, and how they operate, and maybe what are areas that could be really improved on, or looking at infrastructure that they have? What does that look like from a on the ground perspective? Yeah,
so early days Halter was probably quite narrow. So maybe the first few years of Halter was like very focused around labor, as an example. Over the years, as the products expanded and developed, it's become a lot more diverse, so that it suits more like different types of operations. Because I think the obvious point here is every farm is different, but also every farmer has different goals. So you can take like my old man right now, he's been farming, 20 or 30 years. Now for him, it's like he's done the years where he was chasing like every percent, trying to win awards, trying to grow equity. Now for him, it's all about like, I want to, he's getting older and he wants to spend more time off farm, and he's got all these hobbies, and he's flying gliders and racing go-karts. And so for him, it's like his goals are different, right? Yep. He wants to still run a high quality farm, but he wants to do it with like the least amount of stress and the lowest effort possible.
Right.
He loves farming, and like he just wants to love farming and not be like chasing every little detail. And Halter enables him to do that and probably be as good. I think he had a record year last year, but to be as good, but just without like the same level of effort. And then there's other farmers that want to use it to just grow as much equity as possible. It's just all about productivity or profitability, and it's a tool, and they use it in that way. So step one is like, well, what's the farmer's goal? Yeah. And that's part of every time we talk to a customer. It's like, cool, what are your issues or problems, or what are you trying to solve, or where are you trying to go? And then ideally, the product's good enough and broad enough that it can help a farmer do that, no matter what it is. And so that's kind of how it breaks down. So we have farmers, that will, if they're trying to lift productivity, it's around pasture, be more precise, growing and harvesting more grass. A lot of farmers that see labor benefits, see mating and health, and across the board, you kind of see ROI in different buckets. But
so the first few generations of Halter, you're adapting to the current farm that's there.
Yep.
What about farms that maybe are looking at redeveloping or a greenfield site? Yep. What is that door open for them with Halter? How would you look at that from a farmer perspective, that you could really set up your farm knowing that you're going to use that type of technology? How would that be different?
It's a great question. It's one that's almost like get on a whiteboard and answer it. So pasture farming is like a balance between what's best for the grass and what's best for the animal. So an interesting thought exercise. If you took the animal out of the equation and said, okay, I've got a piece of land and I want to grow as much grass as possible, that's the thing which correlates the tightest with profitability, right? Is pasture harvest per hectare. So if you took the cows out and you said, okay, how do I grow the most grass? The answer would be you would probably put a mower on a tractor, and there'd be times of the year where you don't harvest anything, and then there'd be times where you're harvesting like a third of your farm. Right. And you wouldn't have paddocks, right? You would go around and you'd be surveying every little square meter and being like, okay, this patch on the side of the bottom of the hill here it's ready to be harvested. And you could probably grow 30, 40, 50% more grass, because you can grow every piece of ryegrass to its third leaf, as an example. Half the plant's grown on the third leaf. But for a lot of the season, when you have cows, you can't do that. You still need to feed your cows. Even if growth slows, you can't afford to plug up all these constraints. So you can kind of run this thought exercise of like, well, what's the impossible perfect farm look like? And then you start to add the constraints back in. So you add the animals back in, but you probably wouldn't add the fences back in, right? You still want the flexibility of like, well, if there's a patch over here and a patch over here, well, that's where we want to graze, not some arbitrary shape that we just put there because it was a straight line. And so you'd be farming to the contours. You'd be farming a lot more to like the types of soil, all the type of stuff. And so you end up, I think, with like a bit of a blank canvas, and you just have all the flexibility in the world. You probably wouldn't run as big a mobs. You'd reduce competition and whatnot as well. You'd be feeding custom based on body weight and things like that. So there's a lot of optimizations. There's a great paper by Derry and Zed. I think it's called, you have to check this, but the hidden dollars or hidden opportunity, hidden dollars in grazing management. And the conclusion is like there's two things holding back pasture-based systems, and it's too many fences and not enough data. And it makes sense, right? Like fences are in the way.
Yep.
They're either paddocks are too small or too big all the time. And you don't have real-time accurate data to make better decisions. And so farming becomes this very intuition-based, you're making kind of good decisions all the time, but it's impossible to make perfect decisions all the time. Too many variables, too many second and third order consequences. But I think that's where you can push it to. So we see, to answer maybe around this out, we see farmers that do come, and if it's a conversion and they'll be running 40, 50 hectare blocks, or a lot of farmers pull fences out to give them more flexibility and so they can be more precise. The product's not like, it's mostly built for farms with fences because most farms have fences. So it's not quite yet like a pure, hey, just have a boundary fence and let us loose. But that's where it will get to. That will be the most optimal way to run a pasture farm in, I don't know, a few years' time.
Do you see that making a difference with, like, say, lameness and things like that because of being able to maybe change around your laneways or things of that nature?
We see already pretty big benefits in lameness or non-environmental lameness. A lot of farmers say, hey, I didn't think I was pushing my cows. But obviously when they can dawdle at like whatever pace, then you do reduce obviously pressure and they're not stepping on stones and stuff. So we see that already. I think there's definitely opportunity in that. I think when you remove the like practical consideration of having to do things with humans and with staff, it's like, well, why wouldn't you run 10 mobs instead of 2 based on dominance or body weight or body condition score? Like it's not really any more effort. So obviously you would. Right. And then the cows respond better and perform better and there's less competition. And so I think we think about innovation as like anything positive sum, anything that's a win-win on a couple of fronts, and it's not a trade-off. And I think all of these examples are like, if it's positive sum, that's where we're pushing the product towards.
Yeah. Going back to the technology itself. So you mentioned that you really developed the hardware.
Yep. You
developed the software, and then now you're really developing the data insight side of the business, right?
Yep.
So it was usually you see it very hard for a company to make it through that. Usually they're focused on one of those steps, right?
Yes.
What would you say was the biggest factor in allowing you to achieve scalability with all 3?
Yeah, I think I fully underestimated this from the beginning of Halter. There's probably videos of me pitching around, or there'd be a lot of people that can tell you I said many times, hey, the hard part of this company is training cows. Thousands of companies have built hardware. Easy, no risk. Apps, piece of piss. Like, you can write software and if you get it wrong, you just rewrite it. And so in the beginning, we were just focused on could you train a cow. That was obviously quite hard. It took us a while. Once we proved that out, you have to build the hardware. Once you prove that. So it was purely just out of necessity. Like we became good at hardware, software, product, animal training, like because just to have the most basic product working, we needed to do all of those. The product needs to be easy to use and intuitive, and it needs to be like insanely reliable. Like 99.9% reliable would mean 1 out of 1,000 cows are always out. Like if you're on fodder beat, or you just can't have that. Like so I think we became good at these just purely out of necessity. And that's, constraints are like the mother of all invention in a way. And so, and I look at that and I'm like very glad. I'm like, wow, that's a good, that's a good lesson. And I think as we push forward, it becomes a lot more about like, okay, how do you keep like all of those early people that went through that and learned the hard lessons and it was kind of forged into them. You're now trying to codify into your culture and hold the hiring bar high and make sure you're still hiring insanely great people. And that's how you keep kind of pushing forward and stay ahead of your competition and things like that.
Yeah. Going more toward the data that you guys have now collected, you're collecting a lot of data in real time every day from the farms that you're on now.
Yep.
Are you really focused on building artificial intelligent models around that data that is going to be able to be very as precise as you can get for future forecasting of things on farm?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
is that where things are going?
Definitely. AI is, not to throw around buzzwords lightly, but is just a massive change, like huge kind of rising tide that we want to be part of, and we are. Thankfully for us, at the core of a lot of our products, we've been using machine learning and AI for a long time. So for like the last 5 years, we've been training models across the board. And I think there's a good reason for that, which is most of the data you see in agriculture is super noisy because it's from the real world. It's not like data that lives in a spreadsheet or is from a database. It's like you're sensing things that are really noisy and it's really hard to write just basic rules for. And so machine learning is really good at kind of handling that noise and all the, the changes that you see. So I think we will see some massive gains in agriculture from AI. So I think that's exciting. It's been core to Halter for a long time. We're going to keep pushing the boundaries on that. And we just make sure you're working from the customer's point of view backwards. Like, we're not going to just do things because they're cool or fun. As much as an engineer, you sometimes want to do that. It's got to be through the lens of like, hey, what is the value to the customer? Where's the requests? Customers don't care if it's the latest model and, it's running on like H100s, and it's like, well, hold on, but what does it do to my empty rate? Or what does it do to how fast you can find a sick cow? Or, it's that side that really matters. And so I think that's the caution, especially in such a hype cycle like we're in. It's like, how do you make sure you're still building the things that matter? But it's definitely going to play a role. I think it's got huge benefits in ag. And I think really you as long as you can get access to the data, that's the core thing, right? So I think we, having been vertically integrated, having the hardware, having good connectivity, having a lot of sensors on the device, not this one, but that sets the platform to then do all this kind of fun insights and information on top of it.
Do you see it moving to the point where not only does the farm has some information now to look at and say, okay, that I should probably treat this cow this way?
Yep.
Do you see it moving from that to saying, this is what's wrong with this cow, this is a probability that it's this thing,
mm-hmm.
so therefore here's 3 suggestions on how you should deal with that?
Yes.
To move it beyond, now the farm owner might not have to deal with it. Now it's maybe it's the 2IC that doesn't really even need to take that and say, okay, now what next?
So I think the short answer is yes. There's some consideration to how much of a pilot we want to be versus like a co-pilot or a cockpit. And I think you got to almost flip that around and think like, well, what do farmers want? What's the joy and the craft of being a farmer? And in my mind, the more we can serve up the data, we can make it really easy to pull insight from. You can run scenarios, and you can let a farmer be like the critical thinking expert and the IP at the core of it. They know their cows, they know their land, they know their goals, obviously. And we become like this operating system that enables them to execute effortlessly and just make great decisions all the time. And like, I think that's the direction we probably will head. Now, that will definitely include recommendations and warnings and, hey, if you want to feed, that much supplement, it has this impact on X, Y, Z. So I think we'll do all of that. But how much we actually like grab the wheel and drive is interesting. We get asked it a little bit from a few customers. Maybe it'll be an option. We'll build it for like, if you really want us to, we can provide really strong recommendations and guardrails. But we've been thoughtful about that today. We've been really careful to be a co-pilot, not the pilot, because that is just the art, I think, of being a farmer. And it's not always can't always be a science, right?
Right.
So even though we're making a lot of it quite analytical, there's still an art to it, I think.
Yeah. So Craig, you had mentioned it earlier, the agtech space is very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing maybe unconventionally to stay ahead of the competition, or thinking about things that maybe the competition hasn't?
Yeah, I think there's only one answer here, and it's culture. Team and culture kind of go hand in hand, I guess, but that's the long-term thing that matters. That's been something which from the start of Halter we've really focused on, mostly because I was relatively young. I was hiring people way smarter than me and older than me, and I thought like, well, it's not going to work if I have to tell them exactly what to do. And so you kind of, again, out of necessity, we probably built this culture that was really high performing and pretty transparent, and we share a lot of context and we hold each other accountable. And then over time that's developed. And so we think a lot about it. We are like obsessed over talent. I spend probably a third of my time involved in like hiring and talent related activities. We work hard. We care a lot about our customers. We work from first principles. We have a lot of fun. All of these things we just think a lot about and spend a lot of time on. I think it's really all that matters. Like if our mission was wrong, if we have some like crazy fire that crops up, or if anything happens, like it just comes down to how good your team and how high performing is it. And so I think that's the long-term advantage. We have great IP, we have all these trade secrets, we have great hardware, we are always innovating in like what's the next gen R&D, and we've got great we're all that, but like at the core, it's just team and culture. I think that's the thing that really matters. And you see that time and time again across industries, across verticals. So
how do you get that from a really deep level? Because there's so many companies that always talk about that, right?
Yep.
We always work on building our culture, but a lot of companies, they may work on it, they may talk about it a lot, but it just doesn't sink in. It just doesn't hit.
Yep.
Why is it hit with Halter, with what you're doing?
So I think that's a great question. So I think culture isn't trying to be nice all the time, or to like nice to everybody all the time. Culture can be anything you want it to be, as long as you're aligned. And so if you look at Apple or Amazon versus Netflix, like they've got radically different cultures.
Yeah.
So, and they're both like very successful companies. So it's obviously you can pick, there's a lot of ways you can define your culture. The important thing is you're aligned. So I think most companies often are too scared to have a really strong opinion about what their culture is and what it isn't. And so for us, we've learned over time that we are happy to have a strong opinion about our culture, and it's not for everybody. So we're not trying to be everything for everybody. You just become, vanilla ice cream. And so I think that's the thing which it can be uncomfortable. There's a lot of rational people that don't want to work for Halter. That's fine. We're not on a mission to convince the world to work at Halter. But it means the people that do choose to work for Halter know exactly what they're signing up for. Yeah. And it becomes this really high-performing environment they really want to be a part of. That could be like, we're open about the fact that we work hard. Like there's a lot of companies that will promote work-life balance or other things. And, we will often talk about the fact that like we do big hours when we need to. And that's a big part of our success, is the fact that we've been able to work really hard. And farmers work really hard. So right. It's, and
you have a very similar culture to your clients.
Yeah. Like if farmers are working, Christmas Day, you're still milking cows and doesn't stop. Right. And that's the same we have to support it. And so so there's things like this that I guess we are just, over time, we've learned to be comfortable with the fact that we're not trying to convince everybody to work at Halter. It's a high performing, fast paced startup. It can be a bit chaotic. It's a bit intense. But it's also a lot of fun. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of growth. And that's just who we are. And so, I think that's probably the difference, is like you have to have an opinion. And I also just think a lot of companies don't think it's that important. It's a bit soft and it's hard to measure, and or they talk a lot about it, but the leaders don't do it. I think being mission driven, having a greater purpose, that's like pretty motivating for a lot of people.
Have you been really intentional about how you're going to do that as you expand out from New Zealand here into the US, Australia, with that team that's might not be here every day?
Yeah, for sure. If you would ask me, like, how do you do that when you're at the scale of Amazon? Like, I don't know. Hopefully we'll work that out. But we will keep really focusing on it. And I am confident we'll work it out. But for sure, as you new people in new markets, there's some tactical things you can do. You can transplant some of your people that are really good examples of your culture and second them to new markets. We do that. Obviously, the first hires you make are really critical. The hiring process, we spend a lot of time on this. And especially just in a startup, things change all the time. That you can have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in the same day. It's very hard to tell someone this is exactly what your role will be. And, it's just things are changing all the time. And so I think having people that are culturally aligned is just so core. We've now, over the 8 years, I think that's just been proven time and time again for us. It was also true at Rocket Lab. When I went to Rocket Lab, and I thought, as an engineer going to a rocket company, because rockets were cool, which was true.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the thing that really stood out to me is like, holy shit, the team and the energy is like infectious. Like, I don't care if I'm working 12 hours on a Sunday. Like, I just want to be here. I want to be around these people. We're doing this like crazy thing. I felt so lucky to be there, no matter how hard it's working. And I signed up and I didn't even know like what I was getting paid. Like, like it was just, it felt truly like a life-changing experience because my work mattered. And so I think that's just, kind of, when we started Halter, it was obvious we were going to try and do the same thing.
Yeah. So you had a great example to start from to be able to create what you wanted to see.
Yep.
Let's hit on the sustainability side of things. I know it's probably an overused buzzword, an overused term, but from a sustainability side, it's a big thing for a lot of companies down the line from the farm production. How do you look at that as a company and what you can help the industry evolve to?
Yes. So this is part of our mission. Half the word is agriculture, right? So it's like, how do you help them to be more productive and more sustainable? Yeah. Really what we're saying by that is like, it's a positive sum thing. I've touched on this before, but it's like, how do you do things that are where you win on both fronts? So a bad example is zero-sum thinking is like, we have too many cows. Well, if we just reduce the cows, we just have less output, right? We have less food, and they're there for a reason. We need the food. So a better example is like, well, what if we could breed and make herd decisions based on efficiency, not output? And so you can have this natural variation within cows, so you have more efficient cows over time. They produce more from the same input, or same number of cows produce more, less cows produce the same. You win on both fronts. You can have more production and it's better for the environment. So that's like an example. Today, how that looks is like managing the grass that you have more efficiently, buying in less supplements, running, if you're higher quality grass, you see like gains in that. Across the board, if you're better at reproduction and mating, you have less replacements, you use less fuel, you use less fertilizer, there's a whole lot of things. It kind of touches all parts of the system. And so again, it kind of comes down to like a farm by farm case. But yeah, that's how you think about it. Now, if you zoom out and look at, say, beef, or especially in the US, you start to like rotational grazing or regen. It's a big thing. Like, how do you utilize the land? How do you use grass to sequester carbon? So you start to, there's kind of some bigger system changes that can happen. And we think virtual fencing and shifting is a very helpful part of that, for sure.
Yeah. Do you see this technology being able to be utilized in an in-shed dairy system or in-shed livestock system? Like, so for example, I've got a 250 cow robotic dairy in the US. Probably one of the biggest things that every robotic dairy farmer talks about is, I wish I didn't have to fetch cows. Right?
Yes.
This would be a great thing to be able to train cows to come to the robot on their own if they have it on their own. Do you ever see a time where you'd be able to utilize this technology for that, or is that something you say, well, we'll let that go for some other company to develop an in-shed type of technology that will fit that system?
Yeah, I think the way to answer that is to almost flip the question, and it's like, well, how critical is pasture to your system? Whether that be how many days a year are you on pasture, or how much of that makes up the diet, or there's a few different ways you could ask the question. And if that's a core component of the system, well, then there's definitely value. Like, that's where the body of the value comes from Halter today. So that would be probably the simplest way to answer that today. The next question is like, well, if you took that out, can you still make the ROI stack up? You've taken out a big chunk. So probably what you need to do is reduce the costs a lot. What you would pay for a system that's literally just shifting your cows like to a robot and back and wasn't managing pasture would be substantially less. You're now competing with labor, cost of labor. Right. So it's like, well, how many hours are you saving? You can easily put a price on it. And so I think never say never, like with scale and whatnot, that could probably work. But it is just a less attractive opportunity compared to the like pasture-based systems we work on today. And I think we would have less impact, and we wouldn't have the same level of like impact on the world or the industry really. So I think that's just working through the first principles. That's how you'd think about it. I do think obviously tech is deflationary, so like costs will keep coming down with volume, etc. We'll keep adding more value to the product and slicing packages, and so farmers will get more options and whatnot. But so maybe in the future, it's definitely not on. It's not something we're actively working on. When we look at agriculture, that's half the planet, 2/3 of it's like grasslands. I think there's a huge opportunity in pasture-based systems.
And one of the things you're doing on farm, so you have part of your system is the collar, part of it is the wireless transmitters, right?
Yep.
So does that give the opportunity for the farm now to basically be have a wireless environment all over the farm?
Yes.
And what does that do then at that point outside of just managing the halter side of it?
Yeah, so it definitely does provide that opportunity. So farmers put up, or ranchers put up these towers. It takes like 20 minutes to put a tower up. It's kind of actually a fun experience in a way. And those all mesh to each other, depending. So if you have 2, 3, or if it's a big hilly block, maybe you've got 5 or 10. They all mesh to each other and they provide coverage of your whole farm. Now, obviously that's for the collars to start with. We need to be able to, we're always communicating back and forward, pulling location and health data and whatnot, and giving any instructions or commands back the other way. So that makes it very easy to add sensors to anything, whether it's water sources or whatever it may be. To date, we have been like kind of fully utilizing that communication link. So we've been trying to pull as much data either way as we can. And anytime you can kind of trade that data bandwidth off with range. So anytime you've got spare, you can trade it for range. It gets quite technical, but so we haven't opened it up. We haven't produced like a channel where it said, hey, anybody else can use this, but we're talking about it and we probably will do it in the future, I think. It definitely aligns with like this operating system for agriculture, right? It's like, hey, well, if you've got the comms, and maybe we'll even make a little platform, it's half the collar, that's the solar panel and the battery system and the radio chip, and you can plug in any sensor, whether it's soil moisture or water sources or a tank or anything, and you just put it there for $10 and it feeds into your system. So, or irrigation, or etc. So yeah, I think the opportunity's there. Definitely when you think about like the hard bits of Halter were communication, solar power, how do you get all that to be reliable and work all the time? We can update the collars remotely. I think you want to do that with any hardware so you can keep making it better.
So for anyone listening to this podcast that is thinking about doing something disruptive in agriculture, maybe it's a different farming method, maybe it's a new technology like what you guys have created. What's one piece of advice that you give that person considering a career or business opportunity in ag tech? And what's something that you wish somebody told you when you first started?
Something I didn't realize in the beginning, and over time it's become very clear, is like how rewarding being in an industry or a space where you actually are in the real world is. So like you build a product which operates in the real world, has real world benefits and impacts, and changes the lives of like real humans. It's not you're not like tweaking an algorithm for trading or like something you'll never see or feel. It doesn't really have an impact, not to throw any shade on algorithmic traders. But so I think that's something we always come back to, like the amount of people which like even AI in the real world is just like it's hard, yes, it's noisy, but it's just so rewarding and quite exciting. So I think that's a really cool thing about ag tech and agriculture is it's just a physical thing you get to be a part of. So that's probably like one thing that was very exciting. Advice, I think anytime, especially with ag tech, so if it's a startup or like you're doing stuff no one's done before, it's going to be hard, obviously. I think like you learn to love the fact it's hard. It's always hard. If it's easy, you're probably not being ambitious enough. Like you solve one challenge and you just open up the next. And I think like learning to love the journey, the fact that it's up and down and there's a lot of challenges and probably that's like the thing I come back to now, reason why I will probably always be involved in Halter or startups and this, like, innovation or entrepreneurship, whatever you want to call it, is like, I just love the challenge of it. It's so rewarding. And I think that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It gives you purpose. Advice though, I'm not sure what would be the single best piece of advice. Just no one really knows in the beginning, and all ideas seem like bad ideas in the beginning. I think there was like 1,000 reasons why Halter was never going to work, and they were they were fair reasons, but you make it work through effort and grit. So
that's one of the things that probably drove you originally, right? Okay, that's the next roadblock I got to figure out.
For sure. We often even say internally on like big scary projects, it's, if someone's like gives you 8 reasons why it will never work, you're like, yeah, okay, but like, what will it take to work?
Right.
What has to go right? And then all of a sudden, that's a different conversation. Because otherwise Halter definitely wouldn't be here. Lots of sensible reasons why it shouldn't have worked. So
a great piece of advice would be reframing the challenge, right?
Yeah,
reframe the challenge.
Yeah, how could we?
Well, Craig, I really appreciate you hosting me here today at the headquarters for Halter here in Auckland. It's been fascinating to get to see Halter out on farms and then come here and talk with you and some of your team of what you guys are working on for the future. So I really appreciate this opportunity and for being on the podcast today.
Cool. No, thank you. My pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk through the journey. So thank you.
All right. Thanks once again for listening to the AgCulture Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Craig Piggott from Halter. And if you have enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody that you know. That's how we get the word out about our audience. This was definitely a special episode for me, being on location. I love doing these with people in person. And once again, check out on our social media pages some of the pictures and video that I took while I was here in New Zealand of the Halter system and of Halter's office and headquarters here in Auckland, New Zealand. Also check out our show notes. We'll put some links in there to Halter and what they're up to as well. And as always, thanks for tuning in. I'm Paul Windemuller, and we will see you next week for another exciting episode of the AgCulture Podcast.